This is going to be probably your biggest, most involved week of presentations because we are covering 2 chapters in the textbook this week. And unfortunately, with the 7-week course, it's the only way to cover all the content. So we're going to be looking at reading comprehension this week, and we're going to cover information called the reader factors and the text factors. Reader factors are the factors that the child brings and how we can teach the child, and text factors are the materials you'll use in teaching them how books and structures of text work. Both of these elements will enhance a child's reading comprehension. So I'm going to take you through both presentations, and please listen carefully to the directions on each page because there are some things that are required this week and there's some things in the presentation that are going to be optional. So I want you to make sure that you know that because I want you to use your time carefully this week. So starting with the reader factors, we are going to do our weekly literature sharing, and the story this week is The Scarecrow's Hat by Ken Brown. Listen to the story and brainstorm how you'll use the book, and then drop your ideas in the weekly literature sharing drop box. This is the only weekly literature sharing that you will have to do. There is a second weekly literature sharing coming up, and that one will be optional. On this slide, you'll see some book resources if you're interested, and also a video of how I use the book in my own classroom. The answers that are showcased in this video can be found in the weekly literature sharing area of the presentation file folder. That's kind of confusing. Within our presentation files, you'll see it. It'll say The Scarecrow's Hat. Start with our message, and in our message you'll see that you're going to go to the next slide for an activity. Also, I want to point out the journal question for the week, which is describe the role teachers play in facilitating interactive literacy experiences and explicit instruction. So you want to look and listen for that within the presentation. I actually like to jot it down, and then as I hear things that will answer my question, make notes. For your warm-up game this week, we're going to use a spinner, and I use spinners all the time with my students, especially in the area of reading comprehension. So what you'll do is click on the spinner, and it'll take you to a website where you'll spin, and then on your spinner, whatever number you get, come back here and read the question. These 8 questions have to do with reading comprehension that we'll be studying this week. As a warm-up, I want you to click here and go to the Padlet board and post an answer to whichever question you spin. I have defined reading comprehension on this slide. And then the next slide is going to talk about the teacher's 3 main jobs for reading comprehension. Part of comprehension teaching, and actually all teaching, is scaffolding. This slide talks about what scaffolding is, and it looks at the gradual release process. The I do, we do, you do. Click on the Listen and Learn podcast to hear this slide explained to you. Another slide for explicit instruction. And the next slide actually breaks it down. What is explicit instruction and what explicit instruction is not? And it's really important to know the differences. Click on the Listen and Learn podcast for this explanation. Next, we're going to look at the learner. And we have broken down reading comprehension through pre-K to 4th graders, and I've given a summary of what is developmentally appropriate for a child in this age and stage. Click on the Listen and Learn podcast to hear this information. We're going to do a quick little exclusion brainstorm. An exclusion brainstorm is where you give boys and girls a list of vocabulary words that are new, and we see if they can pick out which one doesn't belong in the list. For this activity, I have listed many different areas of comprehension, and I've added a few other words. So read the list and then take a guess at what doesn't belong. Just jot them down on a piece of scrap paper. You're not going to be submitting these. But once you have your ideas, go on to the next slide and see if you can figure it out. There we go to those answers. I'm going to squeeze through them. All right, next we have the components of comprehension that we will teach boys and girls before we read to them or before we teach them something. So basically our reading comprehension instructional strategies come at 3 points in a lesson: before reading, during reading, and after reading. And for the next slides, I'm going to break it down into those categories. This is our before reading strategies, things that you'll want to do before you read. And so there are 4 of them. I have a little summary of each of the strategies, and I also have a podcast that explains them in more detail. And I know this is going to take a little bit of time, but I have 4 videos at the bottom. You don't have to watch the whole video, but I would like you to get a little bit from each video that will show you what it looks like in a classroom. So take the time to do that. When we move on to the during reading, there are 6 during reading strategies. Again, the podcast will explain them to you, and then I have videos for the 5 of them that I would like you to watch. Remember, you don't have to watch the whole video, but see if you can see this strategy in action. We'll end with our after reading strategies. Excuse my dog. The after reading strategies, there are 4 of them, and I have videos for 3 of them. I'm very sorry. And also, I have a podcast that explains them. So again, you want to make sure that you're clear on them. There are some strategies that we will hit before, during, and after reading, but for the most part, we have distinct times where you would use specific strategies within a lesson to get the most out of them. We'll move on to mini lessons, and mini lessons are sometimes where we'll put those strategies in play and have some activities. The next slide is also pretty involved. What you need to do is go to D2L, to the presentation file folder, and you will print out the file that's there that gives you activities that we do for comprehension. What you're going to do is take this list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 strategies, and you're going to match them up on the activity. Now, if you want to do this looking at your screen, that's fine, but you'll definitely need to go into D2L to find this paper for the activity. After you're finished, take a picture of it or do something that you can Dropbox it, and then I'd like you to watch the video that explains each of these strategies. This is very important because for our lesson plan 2, these are the instructional activities that you will be choosing from for your lesson plan. So I want you to see which ones you like and which ones you dislike, and find one that you feel comfortable planning for the age of learner that you're interested in teaching. Also, when we make mini lessons for boys and girls, we use videos. Listen to the podcast and have a quick view at these 3 video mini lessons. The last slide for this part of our learner-based comprehension is looking at websites that are valuable resources to you. There are 5 links here, and each link will take you to a different website. And if you click right here on this video screen, it will introduce to you what you need to do for this activity. Then I want you to view each of the links and explore them for a little bit. When you find something very valuable that you think the class would benefit from, click here, which will take you to a Padlet board where you can share the website and also the information that you found. I do introduce the lesson plan project at this point, and you can see those comprehension activities that you're going to play with are right here, and you can choose from those or from the vocabulary activities for your lesson plan too. Just make sure you click on the project intro video, and that will give you some more information. At this point, you have your main assignment for the week. You're going to complete your weekly journal that we talked about at the beginning. It's listed in red. Also, you are going to Dropbox your Scarecrow's Hat activities. Online in this presentation, there were 2 online activities. Slide number 5 had an introduction game. That was the spinner. And slide 20 has the Padlet for sharing those websites. Then you have 1 activity to Dropbox, and that is going to be that instructional activity sort on slide 18. Also, you should at this point choose your instructional strategy for your second lesson plan and begin planning. And you can skim chapters 7 and 12 just to prepare for next week. Honestly, if you don't get to skim the chapters, I think you're going to survive. And I know you have a lot this week, so if you need to bump that out, I'm okay with that. Now we're going to move into the second presentation that is going to continue reading comprehension. Give me 1 second here. And this is the factors of the text. Now, we do have a story of the week, and it's called How Big Could Your Pumpkin Grow by Wendell Miner. I would love if you can watch it and brainstorm, but if you can't, that's okay. On the next slide, I do have in our video the how you would use this book. So if you don't have time to do the brainstorm, but you would like to see what I would do with this book, you could watch that quickly. I also have some links if you're interested in bookmarking things for this book. And on D2L, in our presentation file folder, I do have the completed sheet of my ideas. So if you just want to grab that, again, I know your time is precious this week, so see what is most valuable to you. Please read our weekly message, and there is an opening activity if you click here, and that will get you kind of understanding the philosophy or the mindset we use when we're working with different kinds of texts for readers. Our journal for this week, you've already done, but you are going to be required to do a second journal this week, and this is not an optional activity. So your second journal activity is select and describe instructional strategies that children can use before and during reading content texts to help them with content area learning. You will be able to brainstorm ideas from this presentation and the first presentation where we looked at before and during and after reading and come up with another answer for this. The next slide is that warm-up activity, and you're just going to watch a short video clip, and then there is a Padlet board. You are not required to do this one, but if you think you have a couple minutes, even if you don't click on the Padlet activity, I would like you to watch the video and decide. Basically, you don't have to do number 2, but number 3 and number 4, think about those questions because that sets the mindset for this next activity or this next set of information. Now, this part of the presentation is going to review some of the things we learned the first week about quality literature, and we're going to break down the literature. So the first thing we're going to study is text factors. And there are 3 text factors: genre, text structure, and text features. Listen to the podcast for more information. Then we're going to look at developmentally, what kind of literature do we put in front of our learners? And we have, again, that span from pre-K to 4th grade, and it is broken down and explained. Click on the podcast to hear all about this information. We're going to start with fiction stories and break them down and look at that narrative genre. There's 3 main categories that fiction or narratives fall under. Click on the podcast to hear more about it. Then we're going to move into elements of story structure. And these are things that we're going to teach boys and girls starting in kindergarten, but moving through the grade levels as we add more information. We have a podcast to listen to that will give you information that you need. And then we look at narrative literary devices. And these are the things that make writing more vivid and memorable. Click on the podcast to hear about those things. Now, we have throughout this presentation yellow slides called Try It Out slides. Here is where you can listen to different stories or do different activities and figure out or apply what I've been teaching you on the black slides. So this is going to be an optional slide. If you're interested in trying it out, go right ahead. You do not have to save your answers to the Dropbox. I know it says it there, but again, I'm emphasizing this is optional. The answers are on the next slide if you want to check them out. From narrative genre, we're going to move into informational books and look at the informational genres. There's a podcast on this slide for more information. And on this slide, we have an optional pop quiz. Now, this quiz is not going to count for points, but if you would like to see what you already know about the expository text structures, you could try that out. It should only take about 2 minutes. You do not have to Dropbox your answers, but what you can do is go to the next slide, listen to the podcast, and figure out how well you did looking at those structures. Again, we have a yellow slide, so this is an optional try it out. If you're interested or you have the time, it will be valuable to you. But if you don't have the time, I understand. The next slide does give you answers. I'm going to skip over that. And we'll move now into text features. And we're going to look at a chart that I sometimes use with boys and girls to compare text features from fiction text to nonfiction text. When we look at nonfiction, there are several text features that are not included in fiction text. This chart explains it. Click on the podcast to hear more about that. We have a yellow slide for text features, and it's a try it out with an Educanon video. I know a lot of you really like the Educanon videos. I've heard a lot of good feedback. What you can do is, if you're interested, you can click here, and that'll take you right to the video. Again, this is not a required activity. It's on yellow for the week, so don't worry about it. But if you're interested, you can try it out. Our last genre we're looking at, or last form of literature that we have to teach boys and girls, is poetry. And poetry has 3 main categories. Click on the podcast to hear more about each category. And then I've broken each category down with some visuals you read about. Also, poetry has specific form, and the forms of poetry are discussed on this slide. I'd like you to click on the podcast to hear more about them, and then if you'd like, we have one more try it out slide. And this slide is where you'll look at a poem and you'll match the form to the poem. So we had those 5 forms. You'll decide which one is each one. Remember, this is optional. Slide 32 coming up will give you answers. I'm skipping over that. Then we'll move into Poetic Devices, and we have a podcast to describe them to you. If you take a quick glance, you might notice that you know some of these words, and that's something that you probably learned when you learned poetry. So again, this is a review for some of you. Now, the rest of our slides deal with mini lessons when it comes to the text structure and text factors. So we have some information at the bottom, and then I have some examples for you. This podcast will explain the examples. Right here, we have a free resource that you could click on and then pin. Right here, we have just a photograph that's explained to you. And we have another photograph, and this is a video. So your podcast will explain it all to you. Our last slide wraps up the weekly assignments. Now, most of your assignments were already in the last weekly assignment part of this little intro video. Your only additional requirement for this presentation is to write the second weekly journal entry, and here it is. Optional this week is going to be your weekly literature sharing for How Big Could Your Pumpkin Grow? There are 2 in-presentation participation activities. There is the introduction Padlet fiction nonfiction video on slide 5 and the pop quiz on slide 17. And then we have our participation Dropbox. There are 5 of them, and those are all those yellow slides, and those are the try it outs for the week. And I did list what slide they're on. These activities are optional. If you have time, I know you'll benefit from them. They're really that application of what you're learning, but I know this week we're really putting a lot together, so I'm going to let it up to you. That's our directions for the week. If you have any questions, let me know, and good luck.